On behalf of the League of Women Voters of South San Mateo County, I welcome the candidates and the audience. We're so pleased to see you all here this evening to this public forum for City Council for Menlo Park, City Council District 4. I am Linda Liebes. I will be the moderator this evening. As you probably know, the League of Women Voters is a national, nonpartisan, volunteer organization of men and women. Our education mission is to encourage active and informed participation in government at every level. The League never endorses candidates or political parties. Our sole interest is in helping voters gain unbiased and fair information in order to make decisions on or before Election Day this year, November 6th. And in addition to this forum, I encourage you to visit the State League of Women Voters education site for the election, and you can get these bookmarks over at the table. They're called Voters Edge, and you go to votersedge.org, and your ballot, a screen comes up, you type in your address, and your ballot pops up, and then there are links to every single candidate and every single issue. This forum, as you can tell, is being recorded, and it will be posted on our League website. So you can tell people who weren't here this evening, or you want to rehear something, you can go back to it. To begin, we ask everybody to turn off their cell phones and to please hold your applause until the end of the forum. Questions will be taken from the audience, and many people have already submitted them on the 3x5 cards, and we have volunteers who are collecting them. So if you have another question, raise your hand. The question will be picked up. And will the volunteers raise their hands? Okay. Candidates have drawn numbers to see who will go first. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement, and 2 minutes for a closing statement, and 2 minutes to answer each question. And if you have a question for one candidate, but the others want to answer it, they will also be able to answer it if they want to. There is 1 seat to be elected to the Menlo Park City Council from this district, and we have 3 candidates. We have Betsy Nash, Peter Otake, and Ron Shepard. At this point, each candidate will read a 3-minute opening statement, and I neglected to introduce our wonderful timekeeper who has fabulous, they're new and improved in giving the candidates 1-minute warnings, 30 seconds, and so on. Okay, Mr. Shepard, you're on.
If you can't hear me, could you hold up your hand, because the last one, people said I couldn't hear you. My wife would say that's very unusual, so they can't hear me. First, I'd like to thank the League. We've all been pounding the streets and knocking on doors to try and meet people, and the League's brought you to us rather than us having to come to you, which is very nice. So my friend of mine said, Ron, why are you doing this? And I told him, and he said, well, that's your pitch. You've done it before, and you can do it again. And so by explanation, I was on the West Bay Sanitary District Board for 16 years. I got on the board because a friend of my son's actually was elected director, and he said, I need some help. So I went to the meetings, and my takeaway was, nobody here represents the ratepayer. Nobody represents the taxpayer. So 3 of us got elected a couple of years later, and at that time, the prior manager was in jail for taking kickbacks. The current manager had been illegally hired, so we fired both of them. We had a new manager in our pocket to put in place. We had to mend relationships between staff, management, and directors. And we also had to put in place some long-term planning to make sure that we were giving the taxpayers what they needed on a cost-effective basis. And with the sanitary district, that meant making sure the pipes were replaced before they broke, so you didn't have sewage running all over the place. and developing a long-term financial plan so that you could do it on a regular basis and you wouldn't have blips in the budget and have to sell bonds and that sort of thing. So we put in place a televising program. We televised sewer pipes, which is didn't hit HBO, but every 3 years we analyzed the pipes, were they breaking down, were they the same, what was the wear and tear, and from that we developed a financial plan. 1 minute left. We also developed a production bonus system for the employees. The biggest thing on that was basically whenever someone would come out to help you, they would get a card that would ask you to judge their performance. We demanded good and better for at least 90%. And we got everybody working together, because if the telephone operator answered the phone rudely, so everybody got a bad mark. And so there's a lot of self-policing. Being on the finance committee for the city, I see the same thing. I don't see the citizens being fully represented. Big item was the budget, was the library, $50 million for a library. And I didn't find anybody who really wanted it except people on the library commission. And so that became one of my points for running. And strangely enough, the 20 million was withdrawn. I'll have to talk more later. Thank you.
The next speaker is Betsy Nash.
No, I believe it was Peter talking.
Yeah, actually, I think I was number 2.
Number 2?
Yeah.
Oh.
I know.
Okay, thank
Would you like us
Which
to?
is, yeah. All right.
No, I don't want to sit next to Peter.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Otaki. I'm honored to serve as the mayor of Menlo Park this current year. I've served as mayor 5 years ago, and I was first elected to the city council in 2010. I grew up here in Menlo Park. I grew up at a time when Menlo Park was a suburb of San Francisco. Then it became a suburb of Silicon Valley, which at that time was Sunnyvale and San Jose semiconductor firms. And then over time, Silicon Valley has grown around us. I moved back here to raise my family. I have 3 kids, and I've lived both in Allied Arts and over in Central Menlo, so in both areas of the district. That's a button that came off. Over 40 years, I've seen the city's transformation. I've seen both the upside and the downside of expansion. In 2010, when I first ran for and was elected to the city council, I lived right a block away here on Middle and stared at the 16 acres of empty car dealerships on El Camino Real. After a decade of community dialogue and working with developers, we now are breaking ground on 2 very balanced mixed-use, transit-oriented housing that will bring new customers to our downtown. In 2013, I co-chaired our housing element process to begin addressing our jobs housing imbalance. And now we have 1,400 apartments, mostly over near 101, that are either open or under construction. Just to give you a sense of perspective, the last apartments that were built in Menlo Park were in Sharon Heights in the 1970s. So we had fallen behind in that. In 2015, we faced over 200 acres of 1950s warehouse space, largely dying east of 101. After 60 community workshops, primarily in the Bellhaven neighborhood, we created a live-work-play zone. That's not just with Facebook in mind, but also life sciences and apartments and retail. Yes, traffic is bad. Keep in mind, 80% is not Menlo Park based, doesn't end or start in Menlo Park. We do have a plan to make our streets safer and build the infrastructure to get that traffic moving along and outside of our city. I have a vision for vibrant, family-friendly, innovative, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable Menlo Park to live, work, and play. I'm very good at analyzing complex problems, finding common ground and solutions, and getting things done. I appreciate your support.
Thank you. Betsy Nash.
Good evening. I'm Betsy Nash. I was born here in Menlo Park and went to college at Stanford. 30 years ago, my husband Horace and I bought our house on Santa Cruz Avenue. It literally felt like coming home. Needless to say, Horace and I were thrilled we could raise our family here. The streets were friendly and the schools were second to none. After having a successful career in biotech, I began to serve this community that my family and I loved so much. I volunteered at Oak Knoll, Hillview, and MA, and served on the PTO board. I coached soccer teams and volunteered for Little League. I've served for 3 years on the Bicycle and then Complete Streets Commission, which championed the Oak Grove bike route. I've been so grateful for all these opportunities. They have allowed me to see what is and what is not working well for all of us here who call Menlo Park home. And all of these experiences have shaped my strongly held beliefs regarding the importance of competent planning and decisive action. Although I want to focus on looking forward, I would like to spend a moment looking backwards to see what we can learn from the mistakes of the last 8 years. 8 years of increasing traffic congestion, 8 years of marginalizing small business owners, and 8 years of poorly negotiated deals with Stanford, Greenheart, and Facebook. 8 years of paying more attention to developers than residents. Simply put, the short-sighted decisions and undisciplined planning of the last 8 years are turning our home into someone else's office park. We all deserve a city council that never forgets who they work for. Looking forward, I see a Menlo Park that is vibrant, that is multi-generational, and that is diverse. People can actually afford to live and work downtown. Taller buildings are balanced by more green open space. Santa Cruz Avenue and surrounding streets are pedestrian friendly. We can cross those streets without crossing our fingers. Bike routes are neatly laid out and make it easy and safe to bike downtown and to our local schools. When you drive, parking is available. Downtown is a destination for people of all ages and backgrounds. These are my values and this is my vision. I give you my word that these will drive my decisions as your city council person. I'm proud to say I've been endorsed by the Democratic Party of San Mateo County, the Sierra Club, and our own almanac. But the support I've received from the residents of our district has exceeded my wildest expectations. I'm absolutely convinced that working together, we can come up with winning solutions for all of our stakeholders and grow while maintaining our town's unique and endearing character. Our city deserves nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you all. The first question, I think, is directed at all three candidates. Do you support the construction of more housing in Menlo Park and in District 4 in particular? And let's start with Mr. Shepherd, and then as we go through, then we'll go to Ms. Nash next and Peter, and then we'll come around again. Okay?
Well, the answer's got to be you support more housing. The question is under what conditions. I see a lack of long-term planning as far as traffic is concerned. The city does not have a long-term plan to handle traffic. And what they've done is you have a certain infrastructure, and rather than figure out how much traffic can that infrastructure handle, they just keep developing and developing and developing. I relate this kind of to the sewer district. I hope you don't get tired of that. But you have a sewer plant that can handle so much stuff. And what you do with a sewer plant is you look at where are the bottlenecks and you get rid of the bottlenecks. Now, as soon as you do that, get rid of one, you have another bottleneck. But what you end up doing is having the infrastructure handle as much stuff as possible. Now, with the sewer plant, it's licensed to handle so many gallons. So when that is hooked up, you can't sell any more hookups. The city doesn't have that, can't do that. They can't stop traffic, if you will, from coming on the streets. But what they can do, and what I would do is say, I'm not going to approve any new development unless I'm convinced that our infrastructure can handle the traffic. And I don't care if it's office space, whatever it is, it's got to handle the traffic. So we need to develop a long-term traffic plan. At one of our last meetings, this council member held up, this is our traffic plan. It's a big, thick thing. And the almanac said it doesn't work. So we've got to fix the traffic. We've got to do long-term planning.
Can you repeat the question?
Please clarify your position on Do you support the construction of more housing in Menlo Park and in District 4 in particular?
Okay. We have an extreme housing jobs imbalance in Menlo Park, and we need to build more housing, especially near transit and jobs. So yes, I support more housing in Menlo Park and in District 4 specifically. Having affordable housing affects everyone. It's really important for having the multi-generational, inclusive, economically thriving community. It's also really important that the children who grew up here have a place to come back to and can actually afford to live in our community. With more housing, our schools will be better. We can attract teachers, we can retain teachers. It's wonderful when teachers live within our community and where they work. The same goes for emergency responders and city staff and retail workers downtown. One of the things that I see every day when I go downtown is the help wanted signs. People can't afford to live here, and so it's that our businesses have trouble hiring enough retail workers for their stores. And when people live close to their jobs, when the teachers live close, when the people live close to their jobs generally, it reduces traffic, and we can get more people out of cars and not have as many people commuting. So we need to increase the housing. As we're doing that, we really need to look at the impacts to the community, especially to schools. We need to include the stakeholders, and especially how will the schools be able to handle more people. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So what you'll hear is often my response is actually a little bit right in the middle of the two of them. I do think, I agree that we do need more housing downtown. We did zone as part of the downtown specific plan 680 units of housing, of which 480 are being built now. There's also the opportunity to very tastefully create infill housing. There's a lot of apartments, as we know, that need new renovation, and we can increase some of those units that are walkable and close to transit-oriented housing. Definitely concur with that. But I also understand that there are limits to how much we can put downtown. And that limit is very much like regarding some of the transportation issues. We do need to fix the bottleneck on El Camino, that where we go from 3 lanes to 2 lanes right at Ravenswood. We need a Ravenswood underpass of the Caltrain tracks to help that unlock that intersection, which, as we all know, is the causes gridlock in our part of the city. So yes, I support housing, but we have to do it in a measured way. I also do not support putting housing on Burgess Park. I believe Burgess Park has to be kept as probably our only open space park in downtown, and I don't support that. I would support some housing potentially on the parking lots, but again, we need to balance the fact that we need parking downtown. So all of that take into account. The truth relies on a lot more analysis that needs to be done, and find that right balance between more housing and gridlock.
You're going to do the next one. I'll go with it. Betsy Nash.
I thought you were going to use
No.
that.
Oh, yeah, I've got to use it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We got a
You can
traffic
see
problem
these
here.
people are wonderful, and we're managing with one mic. The second question, and Mrs. Nash will start, and then Mr. Akaki, and then Mr. Shepherd. Please clarify your position on high-speed rail. If elected, will you cooperate with the HSR authority, or will you try to obstruct construction in Menlo Park through lawsuits?
High-speed rail is a very complex issue, and honestly, I don't know that much about it. It's one of the issues that, as a council member, I would go through the process that I would go through with all of the matters that come before the council, where I look at the goal and what are we trying to accomplish. I try and get as much data as possible, preferably from studies that have already been done, as opposed to starting new studies, and ask hard questions. Why are we doing this? Who is it benefiting? What are the costs? What are the priorities for the city, and how does this fit in with the priorities? And who are the stakeholders? Let's get all the stakeholders and make sure that people look at we get feedback from the stakeholders, from the schools, from the emergency responders, from business owners, from residents. Probably should have said residents first. And make sure that that all of the input is adequately reviewed, and that we really figure out what is going to benefit Menlo Park. Generally, I'm not in favor of obstructing with more lawsuits, but I do believe that we definitely need to look at high-speed rail carefully.
So high-speed rail is a over $100 billion and counting project that is probably going to be financially unsustainable for the state of California. Imagine if that same funding went to commuter transportation solutions, whether it's Caltrain or whether it's BART or whether it's grade separations that we need on the peninsula. So certainly one of the things that I've been doing is talking to our state assembly, our state legislators, about talking about how we can use that funding to address our local commute congestion issues rather than spending on high-speed rail, which probably won't get built because they've only identified $20 billion of funding for it. The original proposal was elevated train tracks that would have split our city into two. The city did, before I joined the council, filed suit against the High-Speed Rail Authority over that plan. Since then, the authority has worked with Caltrain to use what's called the blended tracks. That's a little better. But having said all that, and so we're willing to go along with that, but as I mentioned, the money could be much better used for grade separations, for traffic congestion, and local commuter rail options.
Well, I was born in England, and we had a great integrated fast track, slow track, the tube, buses, and so I'm not opposed at all to high-speed rail. I think a lot of people are concerned that it's noisy, and they relate it to the freight trains that come through and at 3 in the morning and whistle every 3 seconds. But it doesn't happen with high-speed rail. The last time we were in England, we stayed in a hotel next to high-speed rail. It's kind of a whoosh. You hear a whoosh, whoosh. There's none of this chugging. So I like the idea of high-speed rail. I also like Betsy's idea. There's got to be some transparency. it's not Menlo Park's high-speed rail or Menlo Park's, we gotta get Palo Alto involved, ourselves involved, Redwood City. And I personally like the idea of, well, I guess they call it a viaduct, where it's not necessarily a bridge, but it doesn't separate the city, but it's a raised track. I just have visions, nightmarish visions of putting the track underground or digging tunnels to get traffic through. When you think Willow Road 101 is a problem, you're going to have a real problem. You start digging up around Ravenswood to get an underpass to have traffic go through. It just, to me, doesn't make sense. So I don't think the issue has really been thoroughly investigated. That's number one. Number two, we're not going to act alone. We need to pull in Palo Alto, the peninsula cities to have some joint effort. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
The third question has to do with Menlo Park libraries, and Peter Otaki will speak first, and then Ron Shepard, and then Betsy Nash. As you know, the Menlo Park Library Foundation has been working and funding an analysis of the needs of our Menlo Park library system for several years. And the process has shown that Menlo Park needs a new main library and a new Bellhaven branch library. The council voted last week to hire the architectural firm of Nolan Tam to do a space needs study for Bellhaven. Nolan Tam completed a space needs study for the main library in early 2017 and recommended that a new main library be built. And the council voted to move the process forward to the next stage. They also allocated funds to do this. Please state your position or your positions on the building of the two new libraries.
Thank you. Yes, the library system improvements is something that we've been working on as a city for the last couple of years. The main library needs study went along first, and the Bellhaven Library behind it. The current Bellhaven Library is actually a large room within the Bellhaven Elementary School, not a standalone library, and as a result it's restricted to certain hours, and it's really a wonderful school library, but not a community library. We've certainly heard loud and clear that there is a lot of need for Bellhaven to have a standing Bellhaven branch library. And that's something that throughout the entire process, all of the workshops, community meetings, we heard that loud and clear. We certainly know with the downtown, with the central library, we went through a lot of workshops to see if there was a way we could do that. Due to sort of the siting on Burgess, request to perhaps add housing to it, there was a lot of issues that made it even more complicated and more expensive. And it turned out to be potentially a $50 million project, of which John Arriaga was willing to pay more than half of the project, which we appreciate. But at the end of the day, we couldn't achieve a consensus around the main library, and Mr. Arriaga pulled his offer. Having said that, I do think we have the opportunity to get the Bellhaven Library done and get it funded. And I think we can also renovate and expand the current library without having to do a complete rebuild, which was at 1,000 square foot construction cost for 40,000 square feet. So I think we can do something to renovate our main library.
You don't want to go next?
Next?
No, yeah, no, Mr. Shepard.
Let me be really candid, which may be offensive to some. I don't have a clue as to who is on this committee that figured we needed to spend $50 million for a new library. It's just beyond me. We talk about transparency, so we've got a little group over here working in some darkness that comes up with $50 million for a new library, and they get some kind gentleman to put in 20. And then you take a look at the library, when you really dig deep, There's affordable housing on top, there's parking down below. It really reeks of somebody's special project. And I find it kind of offensive to try and ram down the citizens' throat $50 million for, it's not a library. It's called a library, but it's a sandwich with things on the top and bottom and a piece of library in the middle. As regards Bellhaven, I don't think Bellhaven's been fairly treated in connection with the library. Bellhaven should have a library. If we don't think Bellhaven should have a library, we should close our main library and have our people go to the local school's library. So I think it's only fair that Bellhaven has its own library. They should be treated like everybody else. And a finance guy got excited. What was the rest of the question?
Well, the last part of the question was, please state your position on the building
Oh,
of the
look,
two new libraries.
I don't think there should be a new library on this side. I think there should be a new library, or a new library should be considered in Bellhaven. Now, what I think should be done is, before you even start spending money on plans for a new building, you ought to spend some money on some sort of monkey survey. Do you want a new library? What's wrong with the library? How can we fix it? How can we make it better? Then you get some public input and you'll be spending your money wisely. And if the survey came back and said nobody wants a new library, you spent a few dollars to save millions. End of excitement.
So I believe that Bellhaven definitely needs a new library. It's something that needs to be looked at on the city priorities. One of my concerns about about the city is that the city sets priorities in January. We need to stick to those priorities. One of the things that we really got distracted with this year was going off and chasing after the main library with Mr. Arriaga's money. And I believe that we need to look at, we do not need a new main library at this point, which is a moot point, given that the money has also disappeared. But I believe we do need a Bellhaven library, and that should be hopefully prioritized in the January council priority setting. And if it is not, basically, this council should be working according to the priorities and really focusing on those priorities. We have a staff shortage. We do not have enough staffing to do some of the critical things that we need to do. And so we really need to focus prioritizations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. The fourth question is on Facebook, and you'll speak in the following order: Mr. Shepherd, Mrs. Nash, and Mr. Otaki. Are restrictions on Facebook development appropriate? What concessions to development are appropriate?
Well, I don't think we should talk about Facebook because it makes us against them. I think it goes back to do we have development or not? And under what conditions do we have development? My understanding is, 1.5 million feet of office space is allocated down in Bellhaven. If that's true, that's going to be 250 feet per person. That's 6,000 workers. How are they going to get to work from that? I don't, you're not going to answer the question. But it goes back to the same issue. You've got to have long-term planning, and then when a Facebook or some issue comes up, you have a plan and you can say, does this fit or doesn't it fit? And if it doesn't fit, why not? And how do you adjust what you need to fit into the plans that we've adopted? And that goes for development and finance and pensions and all sorts of things. There you have it.
I actually believe I agree with Ron. We do need to be looking carefully at all our development. Right now we have we've got an excess of office development. We have an extreme jobs housing imbalance, which is actually creating all of our problems, or many of the problems, with traffic and with our the housing affordability and availability. So what we need to do is look at every development as to how it impacts the community, what is the impact with the schools, with the residents, with the schools, with emergency responders, with the roads and the traffic, with the sanitary and the water system, and also with our public spaces, our outdoor space, our parks. How do all of these fit together? What are we getting for the development? If before we approve more development, we should really know upfront what the impacts are, and it should be a benefit to the community.
Great. We went through a 2-year process of over 60 meetings in which workshops where we looked at rezoning the entire section that's over in the formerly industrial area where Facebook is one of the businesses there. In it, we did do certainly an environmental impact report, study, traffic studies, all of that taken into account. And we are going to go through another EIR process for Facebook's expansion, just to make sure we are taking into account all of the things that both have mentioned. And I'll give you some examples of things that came out of the process. One is Facebook is working with San Mateo County to reactivate the Dumbarton Rail Corridor, which is that rail line between the Redwood City Caltrain station and where Facebook is, and to eventually revitalize that crossing. You remember that train bridge, build a new train bridge to connect to BART in Union City, which would alleviate a lot of the traffic that comes across the Dumbarton Bridge. It will help in terms of addressing many of Facebook's employees, and that is part of this. In addition, there's a public benefit formula that requires, and trying to explain it, an appraisal of the value of the incremental value of over between the current zoning and the new zoning, and taking 50% of that and putting that to fund community benefits, whether it's the Bellhaven Library or whether it's some of these transportation. The transportation master plan that we're working on also is part of that, addresses the traffic over in the area near Facebook as well. So yes, we're taking that all into account and continue to be researching and working on that before it gets built.
Thank you. The next question is about outsourcing and staffing. And Betsy Ness will speak first, then Peter Utaki, and then Ron Shepard. The question is, how many of the open positions that need to be filled can be handled by outsourcing to get rid of the backlog of projects?
I think outsourcing is a really complicated matter because you lose all of the institutional knowledge when you're outsourcing. So I am concerned about outsourcing projects without adequate staff to be working with the consultants. Having said that, we may be in a situation now where we have so many vacancies that we need to look more carefully at consultants, but it's something which I would do very carefully because anyway, so we don't lose the institutional knowledge and so that we actually make sure that we have the adequate resident input and adequate, all of the stakeholders are involved.
So we do have a 15% vacancy rate in our city staff. Our city employees work really hard, they do a great job, and then they get hired away by our neighboring cities. That is the job environment that we have here in the Mid-Peninsula right now. And so it is a key issue of how do we make sure we can continue to accomplish the projects and programs that we've tried to prioritize. So a couple of things, we now prioritize our top 6 projects each year. We prioritize to make sure that the most important projects do get done during the year. In addition, yes, we do hire consultants, but I'll tell you, in the planning department and building engineering department, these consultants lasted no more than 6 months before they found jobs elsewhere and got hired away by another city. And so we have tried to certainly hire full-time staff as much as possible. We're providing commute benefits, things that will help to encourage and keep them with the city of Menlo Park. But we do hire consultants when we can, but there's a trade-off to keep the work going, but there is a trade-off. So, you know, we do a little bit of both, trying to make sure that, and ultimately, if we've got a qualified applicant, we'd rather hire them, no question about it, and have them full-time so that they retain their expertise with the city. So I don't know, yes to both, I guess.
Well, those of you who've been reading the door hangers I've been leaving on your doorknobs will know that I'm a certified public accountant. Those of you who haven't read that, I'm a certified public accountant. And so Deloitte for 10 years, and we audited lots of companies, big, small, non-profit, for-profit. And one of the first things you do when you walk into a place is say, you know, what kind of a place is this? Do people like to work here? Are they angry? Are they happy? How are you greeted? And you get a flavor for whether the place is a nice place. That sounds kind of funny, but if it's not a nice place, people have reasons to upset things and steal and do things that are nasty. So you walk into Menlo Park offices, and I get the impression everybody likes being here. But there's this huge vacancy. And I'm puzzled. Why is this? And the answer that I've been given that I can't prove is that we hired the world's best bakers to make chocolate cake, and then when they're halfway through, we say, oops, now we're going to do white cake with chocolate frosting. And then we threw that, then they could carrot cake with cheese front. So people don't seem to have the psychic income that we all get when we have a job where we get something done. Outsourcing, I think, is great. I think the government should provide the services you need on a most cost-effective basis, and if outsourcing is most cost-effective, you should outsource. There's one big issue I've been raising about. We have the water department that provides water service for 10,000 citizens. Why are we in the water business when Cal Water knows what they're doing? Our people can't know what they're doing. They don't have enough people to have the bandwidth to do pipe replacement and all the kinds of things you need to do to get you water. And in the capital budget is $35 million in the next 3-4 years for pipe replacement. Let's get rid of it and outsource it. Do you have to hold that like that?
The next question has to do with the middle underpass, El Camino Real, and bicycles. And you will speak with Mr. Otaki first, Mr. Shepard, and Mrs. Nash. So the title of the question is the middle underpass. What is the status and how do you propose solving the middle/El Camino Real intersection for safe crossing by bicycles?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the middle underpass, which is will be Middle Plaza underneath the train tracks to Burgess. That has been a project that was identified early on in the downtown specific plan with a lot of consensus by residents that this would be a really great thing to have to allow our kids, to allow us to get back and forth without having to go through the Ravenswood crossing, but rather to have a safe bike ped undercrossing of the train tracks to Burgess. This last year, we've had several workshops with the community. Hopefully, you might have had a chance to attend one of them in order to analyze different potential designs. There's even some talk that one of the alternatives was potentially an overpass rather than an underpass. And again, that's because our staff is being thorough, making sure that before we start, we are looking at the different alternatives. It is very likely will be, I'm sure, an underpass, but we want to make sure we get that right. We're now going into the design stage this coming year. We negotiated $6.5 million from Stanford, of which $5 million is going toward the underpass, which is 50% of the underpass. And I believe we'll be able to use some of our hotel taxes that will help to fund, as well as grants, to be able to fund the remainder. So I'm very hopeful that we will be able to get started on this very soon. And yes, that includes also a safer intersection, crossings on both sides, crosswalks, longer time for pedestrians to get back and forth, and also bike lanes on Middle, which is a separate project, but that'll be coming probably this coming year, and the underpass probably in about, hopefully in two to 3 years. So that's our plan.
Oh, thank you.
My pleasure.
I don't ride a bicycle too much these days, so I don't have any vested interest in the bicycle underpass or overpass. My position would be, let's find out what the citizens want, and let's provide it to them on the most cost-effective basis. It's that simple. Can I save my time for another question? Okay.
It's an accounting answer to your question. So the bicycle pedestrian underpass at Middle is a wonderful thing for the future. What Peter was describing is wonderful with the safer intersection, the bike lanes on Menlo, on Middle Avenue and all. The problem with it is I've actually been on a subcommittee for this project as a member of the Complete Streets Commission, and we have been on hold for months and months and months since the community meetings because there's no staff available to help us. And we've tried several times to restart this project, and the answer has been there's no staff, we can't restart it. So in the meantime, while there's bulldozers on the property, Stanford is proceeding with the project. We have absolutely no plans for either the Middle Avenue underpass, nor the El Camino intersection, nor the bike lanes on Middle, all of which are really important, not only for the people who want to be going to and from Burgess, but also it will help with traffic. So even the people who aren't using the bicycles and pedestrian, even people who will be using the bicycle and pedestrian, who won't be using the bicycle and pedestrian underpass themselves, they will see a better, the traffic will improve because the people who are currently driving around on Ravenswood will be served by this underpass, and hopefully with safer, comfortable bike lanes and sidewalks, many, many more people will be walking and biking to Burgess rather than driving. However, all of this needs to be started now, or restarted now, so that we can catch up to where, and it'll be ready when Stanford, while Stanford is proceeding, and to get it going. The one other piece is the money is not there. The 50% of the project is well over $5 million that Stanford has approved.
The next question has to do with residents who are renters, especially in District 4. And will be Mr. Shepherd, Mrs. Nash, and Mr. Otaki. 40% of Menlo Park residents are renters, and many of them live in District 4. What will you do to ensure that renters have a secure future in Menlo Park?
Nothing. I think affordable housing is a problem, and I think it becomes a bigger problem when the government gets involved. The way you solve affordable housing is you make it an attractive investment for, quote, greedy landlords to come in and build apartments and charge exorbitant rents, and they're going to find out they can't rent them all, they're going to have to lower the price. As soon as the government gets involved with rent control, landlord-tenant relationships, in my view, it creates an atmosphere that is not investor-friendly, and you will not get people in to build apartments that you need. I guess I can't answer that, can I?
Okay, I'm actually on exactly 180 degrees different from Ron on this one.
Well, I didn't graduate from Stanford, that's why.
So I believe even more so after going door to door and talking to many, many renters, that it's critical that we do something for people to make it more affordable and more housing available for renters in our community. We want to have the people who are in our community to stay in our community, and we want to be able to have the teachers and people working downtown and city staff, attracting city staff and all, able to live in our community. We need to build more housing, but we need to do that with lots of input from all of the stakeholders. I believe that the Housing Commission has proposed a tenant relocation program, which I support. I believe that we need to have a safety net so that when renters are forced out, that there's, for no cause of their own or through a significant rental increase, that there is some safety net for them. While I was walking the district, I met a 72-year-old gentleman who's been renting in Menlo Park for probably 30 years or so. He said his landlord is a wonderful landlord, has been keeping the rent under market, and yet he sees a huge development going up across the street. This is actually on University Avenue for all of us District 4 people. And he's petrified that his landlord is going to sell out justifiably, make some money, and sell the property, and then he will be out on the street and he doesn't know where he will be able to turn. He's lived there for 30 years, and when I was talking to him about tenant relocation, he basically said he was very excited about it. It's at least some sort of lifeline that would keep him from being homeless.
So similarly, I'm right in between here. I'll mention that. So the rental crisis has been an issue that, just to give you an example, between 2010 and 2015 in San Mateo County, only about 4,000 apartments, housing units were built in that time period, and a lot more jobs were created in the tech industry. So we have this jobs housing imbalance that we have to address. As I mentioned earlier, we're under construction or opened 1,400 units of apartments, and 440 apartments just here on El Camino are being built across both the Stanford and Greenheart project. We have to address the supply-demand imbalance to get rents down. And actually, with all the apartments that have come up in Redwood City, we're now starting to see rents at least stabilizing. Having said that, we still also have to make sure we have 15% of those apartment units in what's called our below market rate program to help provide for low-income folks that need apartments. And I'm opposed to rent control because long-term, the wrong folks wind up getting benefited by that. On the other hand, I do believe that there are tenant assistance policies that we can do to help make sure that renters aren't thrown out on the street, that there's some transition, there's a way that we can work to do that. So a modified form of the tenant relocation assistance is something that I look forward to voting on, but in a way that is consistent to keep the market production of new apartments going and encouraging more rental units in the city.
Yeah. The next question has to do with downtown Santa Cruz Avenue. And the speakers will be Betsy Nash first, Peter Otake, and then Ron Shepard. And the question is, what is your vision for downtown Santa Cruz Avenue in 10 years?
As I said in my opening statement, I look forward to a Santa Cruz Avenue that is vibrant and has lots of restaurants and interesting shops and cafes, and is a place that is walkable, and we have people of all ages there. It's attractive with public open spaces, and it likely has denser housing, but it's balanced by green open space, public spaces, and it's a destination where people really want to go. I'd like to see it, as I said, multi-generational, diverse, inclusive, and a place where people go and shop, and they go and just hang out, and they want to go to try different restaurants because there's lots of different restaurants available. And to do that, we really need to deal with the housing and the traffic and make it a place that people can comfortably walk to, bike to, and don't always have to drive.
So when we went through the downtown specific plan process, I don't know, many of you may have recalled there was a vigorous debate about preserving the downtown village character in 2012. And the compromise that we arrived at, the community, the council, as part of it, was to make sure that the downtown Santa Cruz Avenue is not higher than 3 stories. That was really the key to try and keep it as charming, as walkable, and without overly densifying Santa Cruz Avenue. In addition, and more recently, as you've probably seen, we installed outdoor dining areas, which I think have become quite popular. They've helped attract more customers who can sort of leisurely sit outside in the wonderful weather we have in Menlo Park and enjoy their dining experience downtown. We know we're at capacity in the parking lots now, so we will need to build a parking garage, because we need about 30% of the spaces are actually used by employees of our downtown businesses. So let's get them in the garage and allow the customers to use it. And then finally, we will see new customers coming from the new housing that's on El Camino. It's walking distance, and that will attract more restaurants, more retail businesses. I think we're going to see a wonderful revival of downtown Santa Cruz while still keeping the charm of our downtown. And I'm very excited about that.
Well, at my age, my dream would be in 10 years I'd still be able to see it. But, so, as I said, I was born in England, and I like the village concept. I was born in a little village 20 miles north of London. And Menlo Park in some ways reminds me of that. There's little parks and shops, and you don't have tea shops and bakeries like we did there. Right? So I'd like to keep that vision the way it is, keep the village vision. We do need some changes, though. I think we need public garages. We don't have public garages. Somehow we need to develop public garages. One of the council people had a vision of a public-private partnership to build, garages together with restaurants and housing and movie theaters and so forth. And I think that's really worth investigating, because you've got to do something, otherwise it's going to die. 3 stories sounds okay to me. I mean, it could be 2 or 4. I prefer 3. Oh, the other thing I'd like to see is I'd like to see some public toilets. You go to all the villages in Europe, you have public toilets. Here, there's no public toilets. I think that's a disgrace. So I think we need to do something that combine the garages with the public toilets. In different locations in the garage, of course.
The next question has to do with school districts. And Mr. Otaki would speak first, then Mr. Shepherd, Mrs. Nash. Would you support including the Bellhaven area in the Menlo Park School District? Why not?
You get that hot one first.
So as I mentioned earlier, I grew up here and I went to Long Trotter Middle School and went to Woodside High School. And even back then, in the 70s, there was a big difference in the educational preparedness of the Las Lomitas and Menlo Park School District students and students coming out of the Ravenswood School District, whether it was East Palo Alto or Menlo Park. We have 20% of Menlo Park residents who live in Bellhaven who have to go, who are part of the Ravenswood School District, and they have half the average income of the rest of Menlo Park, and yet they choose to send their kids to, for example, some of the different private schools, the Beechwood School, many other schools, some of the charter schools, to get them out of the Ravenswood School District. It continues to be an unconscionable problem that we have, is this inequity. Having said that, how do you solve it? And I've been doing a lot of work with the Bellhaven Neighborhood Association. There is a way to do it, but it's a 2-step process. So it first requires taking Bellhaven Elementary School and Bellhaven out of the Ravenswood School District and forming a school district on their own, but that they would hire the Menlo Park School District to help run the schools. And then, over time, with the property tax increase that comes in from Facebook and all of the other development taking place, that actually reaches a per student property tax, $13,000 per student, which is what we have in the Menlo Park School District. So in other words, it doesn't create the dilution in per student funding that has always been a fear of bringing the Bellhaven students into the Menlo Park School District. It won't be overnight, but it will be over the course of the next several years, and it can be done.
I didn't say anything.
Nope, you didn't.
Well, my next.
I think so.
I've got I guess a completely different answer. I think our job is to educate children. It's not to send them to a school. And I think the parents should be able to send their kid to the school that is best suited for them. If you have a school district that is not doing a good job, hopefully the students could go to another school, and that school would have to just close down because they don't have any students because they're not doing a good job. And so you've seen it in Chicago, I think, where the Catholic system has taken kids created a public school, and the kids do well because the school does well, and the school's more interested in educating children than they are in hiring family members to work at the school district. So I think the Ravenswood School District needs cleaning up. no other way to say it. Question is, who's gonna do it? I hope to get a whole bunch of new people on that board.
There's a huge equity issue that I think everybody recognizes with Bellhaven schools that needs to be addressed. There's also several others. The Redwood City School District has a school, Garfield School, within the Menlo Park that some of the Menlo Park students go to that also needs to be addressed. I don't believe that it's a viable solution to combine the districts at this point, although I believe that everything should be looked at. But we definitely, it is not right that the schools are so disparate. And it's, as a city council member, it would be something that I think that we should look into. It's also wonderful that we will now have, with district elections, that there will be a member from Bellhaven on the city council, and I think that that will help the equity issues significantly. So, I'm not sure what more to say about the school districts. I would actually like to spend a little bit of time going back to the last question, and that's with the character of Menlo Park. And one of the pieces that I didn't mention was, I think part of what makes Menlo Park so unique from talking to residents and shopkeepers and customers is Menlo Park has a really small community feel. People know the shopkeepers. I know my dry cleaner. I didn't before, but now, anyway, it's something that I think we really need to retain is the special personal relationships that many of us have with the shopkeepers. And as we grow, that's something that we really need to make sure doesn't get lost as part of the unique character of Menlo Park.
I agree with you because we just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. I got to know the jeweler real well, and I wish I hadn't.
Please put a sign.
He took a sign.
The 10th question has to do with the city pension costs. And Mr. Shepherd goes first, Mrs. Nash, and Mr. Otake. Very brief question. How will you address the issue of increasing city pension costs?
Well, first thing is you got to know how much it is. The first meeting of the Finance Committee, Audit Committee, was a presentation by the actuary. And the presentation went like this. You know, we have this much funded, this is how much we need to pay our pensions. This is how much we have in the bank, so this is the unfunded piece. So what we have to worry about is the unfunded piece, because that's what we're liable for. I said, no, that's not right. And I've had some actuarial training because I put together insurance companies for physician malpractice, dental malpractice. So I know a little bit what I'm talking about. First thing you're doing is you're taking what you think is the pension liability, the total liability, you're discounting it by 7%, because you think that's what you're going to earn, and you don't earn 7%. So right away, that total liability is understated. The next thing you have to look at it is you've only funded it 70%. So if you're going to earn 7% on the total, you really have to earn 10% because it's only funded 70%. Everybody understand that relationship? Okay. You're not earning 10%. So what you've really got to do is discount the thing instead of by 7, like 3.5%. And if you did that, you're going to find your pension liability is probably double. He said, Ron, you're right, but it doesn't matter. I said, what? He said, it doesn't matter because if we don't collect enough this year, then we can just up the rate next year. I said, that's lying to the people. You got to know what it is. Because I think you have to pay people the pensions that you promised them, but if you're going to pay what you promised, you got to know how much you promised, and you don't know. And saying we're going to pay it next year is just a bunch of compost, as we would say in the sewer department. So that's the first thing. You got to find out how much you know before you... Now, I just come into the good point.
You can have a minute of my time.
Thank you. So so you have to work with other public entities to change to get legislative changes to make that work. Now, an easy way to make it work to reduce your liability is people have to retire at a certain age. So if you take policemen who are 50 years old, they retire because they're making $150,000 a year and their pension's going to be about $120,000. So it's stupid for them to continue to work. So they quit and they go somewhere else, like Facebook and work. They can't work for somebody that offers CalPERS. They can work, I think it's 900 hours a year, so half a year. So I sent a letter to Governor Brown, of course he didn't respond, he didn't know who it was. And I said, why don't you allow people to work after they retire without penalty? And I've spoken to some policemen and they said, they think it's double dipping. It is. But instead of paying a new person 150 grand a year to do the job, plus 40% for benefits, you don't have to pay the benefits.
I think it's really important, very quickly. I think it's really important to support the retirees who have been supporting our community. I think it's really important to avoid overburdening the taxpayers. And I would rely upon the Finance and Audit Committee, of which we have 2 members here, who I am very confident would have the expertise to help solve this issue.
You saw how far we got with the action, right?
So I agree with Ron's numbers and assessment, and I won't go through it again because I think you've done that. I will mention that one of the first things I did when I was elected onto the city council was we paid down by $7.5 million our unfunded, what at the time was the unfunded liability for our safety, basically our police officers. And the reason why is because we were getting charged 7.5% at the time, that's that assumed return, and yet our reserves were only earning 0.5% a year. So it's like having a credit card bill that you're paying off over years when you've got savings that is a fraction. Let's deal with that. And that actually reduced what we're paying on police officers from what had been 32% of their salary to 23%. We're 10% lower than most of our neighboring cities pay for the pension costs for their police. We also, the previous council had negotiated with all 4 bargaining units, all the 4 labor unions, where they pay a percentage. In fact, 2 of them, it's a 50-50 split with the city for increasing pension costs. And I can tell you that is now becoming a significant part of their paychecks, as well as, and the city continues to work with the unions to have a fair split of the increasing pension costs. Finally, we have a policy where 25% of our surpluses, when we have a surplus each year, and we've had them, goes to a strategic pension reserve in order to help to make sure that we are funding that unfunded liability, which has gone up because of different assumptions, newer assumptions on longevity and rates. But it is something that we continue to monitor and fund through the strategic pension reserve.
Do you have any other questions?
No, we have a lot of questions.
We're trying to fit them all in.
This is the most wonderful candidate forum.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your questions. Well, I mean,
We want commissions from the sale of the TV.
but all right, here are the questions.
We're going to go back
The
to
next
education.
question is on education. And we are now with Mrs. Nash, Mr. Otaki, and Mr. Shepherd, in that order. Currently, there is a wide disparity in the quality of education received by children living in various parts of Menlo Park. One reason for this is that certain school districts take the best and the brightest teachers away from other districts. While individual school boards represent their constituents, their own constituents, the City Council represents all Menlo Park constituents. How would you propose to address the issue of educational inequality?
I don't have any, obviously this is a very, very difficult question and a very, very impactful question. It's something that all of our kids deserve an excellent quality education, and the fact that not everybody is getting an excellent quality education, and especially that there's inequity, needs to be addressed. I don't know how to do that offhand. I would approach it with looking at what the goals are, looking at what the data says, working with the stakeholders, and especially with the various the various school boards and foundations, and trying to get this resolved. I do have one of the Ravenswood Education Foundation school board members has endorsed me, and we've talked a little bit, but there's much to be done. It's a really big issue.
So I think I gave a pretty direct answer about Bellhaven and related to the Ravenswood School District. Allow me to add some additional information that I didn't have the time in that answer. I've also been working with Innovate Public Schools, which is a nonprofit and part of their work is to mobilize parents. And trying to mobilize parents in Bellhaven and the Ravenswood School District is a challenge because many of the parents are working 2 jobs, right? And trying to help them organize and not only demand better education within the Ravenswood School District, but also to make sure they can help support the teachers of their kids. And also, this nonprofit does turnarounds of individual schools within an existing school district. So that's certainly a possibility that we can do with the Bellhaven Elementary School. I was told 5 years ago when I was previously mayor by school districts not to be named, to stay out of it. They said, you're in the city, we don't tell you how to run your police and we don't tell you how to run your sheriffs. I have to say that that really led me to get more involved over the last couple of years and learn about it, and it is a very hard challenge, but there are ways to do it. I think that's a key part. Finally, another thing that we can do as a city that has nothing to do with district boundaries is we can provide as part of our below market rate housing, the apartments I told you about, making sure that we dedicate them and allow teachers a chance. That helps with teacher retention for those school districts, given the lack of affordable housing. So we did that, in fact, as part of the Stanford project, where half of the BMR units on Stanford will go to Menlo Park City School District teachers.
Well, I think we have to set an example on the council. And the example is that we've got to show that our citizens get equal treatment and equal services, no matter where they live. So by example, the school districts may come to us to ask for our help with them, but I don't think we can impose ourselves on the school districts. I think we have to wait to be invited, and if we set an example, we may be invited. Now, there are a lot of things that we do that I think interrelate with the schools, so we ought to make sure that we include school boards in decisions that we make that affect that has an effect on them. And I'm not sure we're very good at that. We need to become better. I noted that on the, we're talking about development before, and East Palo Alto said, hey, that's going to have a huge impact on our traffic flow. We need to be included in the discussion of the development. And they weren't included. And it resulted in us paying $250,000 to settle out of court with East Palo Alto. That's ridiculous. So we've got to, when we do something that affects schools, we have to make sure they are included. And I think through that inclusion, then we may be able to impact some of the decisions they might be making to ensure that the kids all get equal treatment.
Thank you. We'll have one last question, and for those who weren't able to get their questions answered, I'm sure the candidates will stay a few minutes after to answer those questions that you still have. This question has to do with city government and making the council more effective. And Mr. Otake would go first, Mr. Shepherd, and then Mrs. Nash. How have you been involved in city government? How would you improve the process to make the council more effective?
Oops, sorry. So certainly I've been very much involved with the city council, and I feel that I've helped to contribute considerably to reaching compromise and reaching solutions. I try and approach all of these issues analytically. I study very hard and deeply the staff report, the hundreds of pages of staff reports that come to us every week to make sure I understand each side of an issue. It can be whether it's housing or a big project or an individual house upgrade. I try very hard to make sure that I'm listening and I'm understanding both sides of an issue. And then I analyze it and try and come up with a really good compromise. And I think I've earned, and part of that comes from being a numbers guy and being really good at finance and having those skills. And so I think I've earned the respect of my fellow council members and have wound up, I think, accomplishing a lot. In addition, I think as you probably see, you don't see a contentious, council that's going back and forth. We actually do. We don't agree on everything, but we'll vote on it and then move on and get to the next item. We also prioritize, as I mentioned at the start each year. I think that's very important for any organization to prioritize. There's 45 to 70 projects each year and activities that are all great projects. And we have to rigorously prioritize those to make sure that we don't go off in different directions during the course of the year. And I think we're getting better at that. Finally, let me mention with district elections, I am very concerned that we will become siloed. And I think it's important that whoever's elected to have a entire city view to make sure we look at solving the city's problems collectively, together.
Thank you.
Anytime.
I'm going to go back to the sewer district again. I know you guys are getting tired of me flushing that one out, but so the way we operated the sewer district was we said, what is the problem? What's the issue? And then the next question was, once we agreed on the problem, how do we resolve it? What are everybody's thoughts? Let's gather the thoughts. Then from all of those thoughts, we could put together a solution that's best for the citizen. Unlike Washington, where you throw darts at each other by what you think is different rather than focusing on what the problem is. So if I'm on the council, I'm going to stress we have dialogue and not debate. And by that I mean everybody's idea is important. And let's consider the best of those to resolve the problem. An example of what we discussed today is affordable housing. And we all agree affordable housing is a problem. I don't like rent control. Somebody does, somebody likes half of it. But if we all talk about how are we going to resolve affordable housing and how are we going to make it better for people, we just had a solution here about maybe we make it available for teachers who come from school districts that need help. And then we got an affordable housing pool of money. I don't know how much it is. I don't know what we're using it for. Maybe that's
$11 million.
$11 million. I mean, maybe we can use that money for, so, I mean, that's the way I think you solve problems. And so I agree that we should prioritize at the beginning of the year what our issues are and what we want to take care of. And we should be careful not to have 50 of them, but let's just have 4 and do the 4. I think we get sidetracked because we have too many priorities. The other thing I'd like to do is look at the budget on a line-by-line basis and say, stop.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing.
Get a chance.
Oh, no, we don't need you.
Thank you.
Hi. I've been involved with the city government, first as a Santa Cruz Avenue resident when I was a neighborhood advocate, essentially. I gathered neighbors together and we worked on toward the best design for sidewalks and bike lanes for all the stakeholders, and I'm really proud of what we ended up with. That it was a good collaboration with the neighbors and the city. And then I have been, for the last 3 years, on the bicycle and then the Complete Streets Commission. And that's been a wonderful experience, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. And it's also given me a lot of insight into how special the commissions are, how there are so many really hardworking, dedicated residents who have tremendous expertise in the area. And it's not adequately, it could be much better used by the city council. There's times when the information doesn't even get to the commission or it doesn't get to the council. Anyway, we need a better flow between the commissions. I think we need much better communication with residents. And one of the things that I will do if elected is to hold regular frequent outreach meetings so that people don't have to come to the council meetings and talk at 11 o'clock at night for their 3 minutes to give their input. And also so they don't have to follow all the agendas if they happen to be on the email list in order to find out what it is that's happening on city council. I also would like to see much more transparency and accountability in city government. And as everyone was saying, sticking to prioritizing, sticking to priorities, doing less, doing it once, doing it right. Thank you.
Thank you all. In the closing statements, each candidate has 2 minutes and will speak with Betsy Nash first, Peter Otaki second, and Ron Shepard.
I'd like to thank the League and everyone who came tonight. I hope you've learned where we agree and where we differ on the issues. I love this town. It's been an undeniable privilege to have raised our children here, to have volunteered at the local schools, and to have contributed to the creation of bike routes and sidewalks that have made our streets safer. Although the poor decision-making and lack of foresight of the last 8 years has created some challenging problems to solve, I would not be up here this evening if I didn't believe these problems could be addressed. It has been so tremendously energizing for me to walk our streets, knock on doors, and get to know my extended neighbors. It's been equally reassuring to discover that most of the people who I've talked with are worried about the same things that I am. We're concerned about maintaining the character and flavor of this town. We're concerned about traffic jams and unsafe streets. We're concerned about a city council that doesn't seem to be as concerned about these things as we are. At the same time, I've learned firsthand that not everyone agrees with my stand on all issues, but that's okay with me. What I hope everyone can agree on is, if elected, I will stay true to my values. They will be what they have always been. As I mentioned, I've been endorsed by the Democratic Party of San Mateo County, the Sierra Club, and the Almanac. But what matters most to me is the support I've received from the residents of our district. I commit to doing the hard work to realize our shared vision. With your help, we can turn our challenges into opportunities for a better, safer, more diverse, and inclusive Menlo Park community. Thanks for coming out this evening. Please remember to vote. And for City Council District 4, please vote for me, Betsy Nash.
So I'm Peter Otaki. I do want to mention a couple of things. We do have a really well-functioning city. We do have workshops every week on all sorts of topics, including affordable housing. We also take surveys all the time. We did do a survey on the library that came out with the 60% support for a new main library. We rigorously prioritize at the start of every year because we do recognize we have a constraint in terms of hardworking staff. We have 300 employees at the city who work really hard. And if I can ask you, please, whenever you see a city employee, thank them because they're getting hired away too often and we need to retain their talents. And so a simple thank you will be much appreciated to keep them on board. They are passionate about the city as much as we are. So there's no question that we do a lot in the city. I think it's a very exciting time to be in Menlo Park. And together, we have an opportunity to address certain key infrastructure needs that we've talked about for over a decade. Things like the underpass we talked about, the bike pedestrian underpass from Middle to Burgess Park. A Ravenswood underpass at the Caltrain tracks, fixing the bottleneck in traffic at Ravenswood. A new Guild Theater is coming forward that will revitalize their downtown. Downtown parking garage, which will alleviate the parking shortages. A new Bellhaven library. And yes, maybe even make some improvements in the education inequality issue in our city. It's a very exciting time, and we can do this because we're entering a period of financial prosperity where we actually can address and fund many of these issues. So appreciate your support. Let's work together. And I'm very excited about the future that we have in Menlo Park. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee, for putting this all together. And I do have to tell you, I'm having the time of my life knocking on doors and talking to people, and I just enjoy life, and I think being on the council would be just a lot of fun, and I get a lot of psychic income out of helping the citizens. So I graduated from San Diego State. I'm a certified public accountant. I've had actuarial training, and I've been endorsed by the Daily Post, and nobody else up here can say that. If I was elected, there are a couple of things. One is immediately what I would do is look at the budget on a line-by-line item basis because the budget's now being prepared for the July 1, June 30 year. And I would ask for each expense, does this benefit the taxpayer? And if it doesn't, let's not spend the money. And an item that comes to mind, which may offend some people, is the sister cities. Why are we spending money for that? What good do you get out of us having a relationship with sister cities that I understand we spend $75,000 a year for? So I look at each item and say, does it benefit the taxpayer? If it does, are we providing that service on a long-term, cost-effective basis? The couple issues that are facing us that I think are really important are pensions. We don't know, as I've said before, I don't want to repeat it, we don't know how much we owe. Redwood City's just asking for a 0.5% sales tax increase to pay for pensions. We got to solve that now. We've got to look at it now. The next issue is how do we get more money into the city without taxing you? One is let's look at selling the water department. I think Cal Water would like to pick it up. I think Cal Water, another public entity, bought San Jose Water. I mean, we've got 6 or 8 people that are doing the work. We don't have the bandwidth to provide that service. And then to come up with $35 million for new pipes is just, I think we can get rid of all that if we. So those are the couple of things I'd like to start off with. There are a lot of other things I'd like to do, but that's all I've got time to talk about.
Thank you so much. We thank our candidates, outstanding candidates, for their participation and for their willingness to run for this important office. We thank our lead team members who put this together and Little House for kindly hosting this event. Most of all, we thank you, the audience, for coming out. As a reminder, be sure to look up additional information about the candidates on votersedge.org or any place that you can find it that you want to look at. And if you are interested in knowing more about the league or possibly joining us, we have brochures over there along with our bookmarks that have the Voters Edge website. And thank you all for being here, and the meeting is adjourned.
The worst.